No one in the village could forget the day Meera said those words. Words spoken in anger, but carrying a weight no one truly understood at the time. Because sometimes when emotions take over, people say things they don't mean. But what if those words don't just fade away? What if they stay, and come back in ways no one expects? It all began in a quiet home where love and tension lived side by side. Meera was known as a strong woman. She had raised her daughter, Aanya, on her own after facing years of hardship. To the outside world she looked unbreakable. But inside she carried fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being abandoned, fear of seeing her only daughter drift away from her. Aanya, on the other hand, was everything her mother wasn't. Gentle, hopeful, and full of dreams. She believed in love, in kindness, and in building a life that felt different from the struggles she grew up watching. But as she grew older, that difference between them became more visible and more painful. The small disagreements started turning into arguments. Simple conversations turned sharp. Meera wanted Aanya to follow her rules, her ways, her understanding of life. But Aanya wanted freedom, to choose her own path, to live her own story. And somewhere between love and control, their bond began to crack. Then came the day that changed everything. It was an ordinary evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across their home. Aanya had just shared something important, something that meant the world to her. She spoke with hope in her eyes, expecting her mother to understand, or at least try. But Meera didn't see hope. She saw fear. Fear of losing her daughter. Fear of being left alone. And in that moment, instead of listening, she reacted. The argument grew louder, heavier, filled with years of unspoken emotions. Words flew back and forth, some careless, some painful. And then, in a moment she would later wish she could erase, Meera said something no mother should ever say. She cursed her daughter's womb. The room fell silent. Even Meera herself didn't fully realize what she had just done. It was said in anger, in hurt, but once spoken it couldn't be taken back. Aanya stood there frozen. Not just hurt but deeply shaken. Because some words don't just sound harsh, they feel final. That night nothing felt the same. Days passed but the distance between them only grew. Aanya stopped sharing her thoughts. Meera tried to act normal, brushing the moment aside as if it didn't matter. But deep down something had shifted. Something invisible, yet heavy. And then life moved forward. Aanya got married. She stepped into a new home, a new chapter. On the surface, everything seemed fine. She smiled, she adjusted, she tried to build the life she had always dreamed of. But there was one thing missing, something she had quietly hoped would come naturally. Months turned into years. Questions started rising. Family whispers grew louder. And slowly, a painful truth began to settle in. Aanya was struggling to conceive. At first, no one connected it to that one moment. After all, life has its own ways, its own challenges. But deep inside, Aanya couldn't forget. Those words echoed in her mind at the most unexpected times. Was it just coincidence? Or had something deeper been set into motion that day? Meera too began to notice the silence. The absence of laughter, the missing joy she once imagined in her daughter's life. Regret slowly crept in, but pride kept her from speaking about it. Until things took a turn no one saw coming. Because sometimes life doesn't just respond, it reacts. And when it does, it doesn't always go in the direction we expect. What started as a curse was about to unfold into something far more shocking. Something that would challenge everything Meera believed, everything Aanya feared, and everything they both thought they understood about words, fate, and consequences. But the real question is, was it ever a curse at all? Or was it something else, waiting to reveal itself in the most unexpected way? At first, Aanya tried not to think about it too much. She told herself that these things take time, that every couple has their own journey. Her husband, Rohan, was patient and kind. He never rushed her, never made her feel less. But the world around them wasn't as gentle. Relatives started asking questions in soft voices that didn't feel soft at all. Any good news? They would say with a smile that carried pressure. Friends who got married after her were already sharing pictures of baby showers and tiny clothes. Aanya would smile back, but later, when she was alone, the silence felt louder than ever. The house she moved into was warm, but it didn't feel complete to her. Every empty room seemed to whisper the same question. And slowly, that one moment from her past, that one sentence, started to return again and again in her thoughts. She remembered her mother's face that evening. The anger, the fear, and those words. She had tried to forget them, to treat them like any other harsh thing said in a heated argument. But now they didn't feel small anymore. They felt heavy. Almost like they were following her. Rohan noticed the change in her. The way she would sometimes drift off mid-conversation, the way her smile didn't always reach her eyes. One night, he gently asked her what was bothering her. For a moment Aanya hesitated. She had never told anyone about that day, not even him. But something about his calm voice made her open up. She told him everything. The argument, the anger, the curse. Rohan listened quietly. He didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss her feelings. When she finished, he took a deep breath and said something simple, something logical. Words said in anger don't control our lives, Aanya. We'll figure this out together. She nodded, wanting to believe him. And a part of her did. But another part, the quieter, more fearful part, wasn't so sure. So they decided to seek help. Doctor visits began. Tests, reports, waiting rooms filled with nervous couples just like them. Each visit brought hope but also anxiety. Every time the doctor spoke, Aanya listened carefully, searching for answers that never felt complete. Physically, everything seemed mostly normal. There was no clear reason, no definite explanation. Just time, patience, and more waiting. But waiting can be the hardest part. Meanwhile, far away, Meera was living alone in the same house where everything had changed. The walls still held memories, but now they felt empty. She often found herself sitting quietly, thinking about Aanya. About how things used to be. At first, she convinced herself that her daughter was happy, that distance was natural after marriage. But as months passed without much contact, that belief started to fade. She remembered that evening more often now. Those words. She had tried to ignore them back then, telling herself it was just anger. But now, a strange uneasiness had settled in her heart. It wasn't just guilt. It was something deeper. Something she couldn't quite explain. One afternoon, an old neighbor visited her. During their conversation, the topic of children came up. The neighbor casually mentioned Aanya, asking if there was any good news yet. Meera hesitated. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. That moment stayed with her long after the neighbor left. A quiet fear started to grow. Not loud, not obvious, but persistent. Days later, Meera tried calling Aanya. The conversation was short, polite, distant. Aanya didn't mention anything about her struggles and Meera didn't ask. But in between the pauses, there was something unspoken. Something both of them felt but didn't say. And yet, something else was happening too. Small, strange moments began to appear in Anya's life. Nothing too obvious, nothing anyone could easily point out. But enough to make her feel uneasy. Like the time she found an old piece of jewelry in her cupboard, something she had never seen before. Or the way certain dreams started repeating themselves. Dreams where she heard her mother's voice, not angry, but calling out to her. At first, she brushed it off as stress. After all, she had been thinking about the past more than usual. It made sense that her mind would replay those memories in different ways. But the dreams didn't stop. And they didn't stay the same. Each time they felt more real. More intense. As if they were trying to tell her something, or warn her about something she couldn't yet understand. Rohan noticed her restless nights, the way she would wake up suddenly, her heart racing. He tried to comfort her, to bring her back to the present. But even he couldn't explain what was happening. It was around this time that something unexpected came into their lives. A distant relative suggested they visit someone, not a doctor, not a specialist, but someone who was believed to understand things beyond logic. Someone who could see what others couldn't. Aanya wasn't sure how to feel about it. She had never believed in such things before. But now, with no clear answers and growing confusion, even the smallest possibility felt worth considering. Rohan was hesitant, but he saw the hope in her eyes. And sometimes, hope is enough to take a step into the unknown. As they prepared for this visit, neither of them realized that this decision would open a door. One that had been closed for a long time. A door connected to the past. To that one moment. To those words. And once opened, it wouldn't be easy to close again. The journey to that place felt longer than it actually was. Aanya sat quietly beside Rohan, her hands folded in her lap, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't fully put into words. She wasn't sure what she believed anymore. A part of her still trusted logic, medical answers, and time. But another part, the part shaped by memories, emotions, and those haunting dreams, kept pulling her in a different direction. Rohan kept glancing at her, sensing her unease. He didn't want her to feel alone in this, even if he didn't fully understand what they were stepping into. For him, this visit wasn't about belief. It was about her peace of mind. When they finally arrived, the place didn't look unusual. It was a simple home, quiet and almost ordinary. That, somehow, made Aanya even more nervous. She had expected something dramatic, something that would clearly feel different. But this This felt normal, and that made it harder to predict what would happen next. They were welcomed inside by an older woman with calm eyes and a steady voice. She didn't ask many questions at first. Instead, she simply looked at Aanya for a long moment, as if trying to read something that wasn't visible on the surface. That silence felt heavy. Aanya shifted slightly, her heart beating faster. She wasn't used to being observed like that. It felt like someone was looking beyond her words, beyond her expressions, straight into something she had been trying to ignore. Finally, the woman spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet sentence that made Anya's breath catch. "You've been carrying something that was never yours to carry." The words hung in the air. Rohan frowned slightly, unsure what to make of it. But Aanya felt a chill run through her. Because somehow those words felt personal, too personal to be random. The woman didn't ask about doctors or reports. She didn't talk about physical health. Instead, she asked about Anya's past. About her relationship with her mother. At first, Aanya hesitated. But then, slowly she began to speak. She told her everything. And as she spoke, the room seemed to grow quieter, as if even the air was listening. When she finished, the woman nodded gently, not surprised, not shocked, just thoughtful. "Sometimes," she said softly, "words spoken in deep emotion carry more weight than we realize. Not because they have power on their own, but because we give them power by holding on to them." Rohan seemed relieved hearing that. It sounded reasonable, something he could understand. But Aanya wasn't fully comforted. Because the woman didn't stop there. "There's fear tied to those words," she continued. "Not just yours, but your mother's too." That caught Aanya off guard. "My mother?" she asked quietly. The woman nodded. "Pain doesn't begin in one moment. It travels. From one heart to another. From one generation to the next. Sometimes what feels like a curse is actually unresolved fear finding its way forward." The idea stayed with Aanya long after they left. On the drive back, neither of them spoke much. Rohan was still trying to process everything. He wasn't convinced, but he couldn't deny that something about the conversation had affected Aanya deeply. And Aanya, she felt torn. Was this really about her mother's words? Or was it something bigger? Something deeper that she had never thought about before? That night, the dreams returned. But this time they were different. She saw her mother, not angry, not shouting, but younger. Standing alone, looking lost. There was no argument, no harsh words. Just silence and sadness. Aanya woke up suddenly, her heart pounding. The image stayed in her mind, clear and unsettling. It didn't feel like a normal dream. The next morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was connecting, something she didn't fully understand yet. Meanwhile, Meera was going through her own quiet storm. She had started noticing small things too. Memories she hadn't thought about in years began to surface. Moments from her own past, her struggles, her fears, the times she felt powerless. She remembered how alone she had felt while raising Aanya. The pressure, the constant worry, the fear of not being enough. And slowly, she began to see something she had never noticed before. Her anger that day, it hadn't come from nowhere. It had come from years of bottled-up fear. The fear of losing the only person she loved. But realizing that didn't bring her peace. Instead, it made the guilt heavier. Because now, she couldn't ignore the possibility that her words had left a deeper mark than she intended. Days passed, and the distance between mother and daughter remained. But something invisible was shifting. Aanya started paying attention to her thoughts more carefully. She noticed how often those old words repeated in her mind, especially during moments of doubt. It was as if they had quietly become part of her inner voice. And that realization scared her. Because if those words had become part of her, then what did that mean for her future? Rohan tried to keep things normal. He encouraged her, reminded her of the present, of the life they were building together. But even he could sense that this wasn't just about physical challenges anymore. This was something deeper. Something emotional. Something unresolved. And just when they thought they had reached the peak of confusion, something unexpected happened. A phone call came one evening. It was from Meera. Her voice was different. Softer. Almost hesitant. She said she wanted to visit. Aanya froze. It had been a long time since they had seen each other face to face. Too much had been left unsaid. Too many emotions had been buried under silence. Rohan looked at her, waiting for her reaction. But Aanya didn't have an answer right away. Because deep down she knew. If her mother came, it wouldn't just be a visit. It would bring everything back. The words. The pain. The questions. And maybe, the truth they had both been avoiding. And this time there would be no easy way to ignore it. The moment Aanya ended the call, the room felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just heavier. As if something long buried had suddenly been pulled closer to the surface. Rohan watched her carefully. "You don't have to say yes," he said gently. Aanya didn't respond right away. She walked to the window, staring outside without really seeing anything. Her thoughts were tangled. Part of her wanted to avoid it, to keep things as they were, distant, controlled, safe. But another part of her knew that nothing about this was truly safe anymore. Not the silence. Not the unanswered questions. Not even her own thoughts. "She's coming," Aanya finally said, her voice low but certain. The next few days felt slow and fast at the same time. Every small thing seemed to carry extra weight. Aanya found herself cleaning the house more than usual, arranging things that didn't need arranging. It wasn't really about the house. It was about control. About preparing for something she couldn't fully prepare for. At night, sleep became even more restless. The dreams continued, but now they shifted again. This time, she wasn't just watching her mother from a distance. She was standing there, in the same space, trying to say something, but no words came out. Her voice felt trapped, just like it had been all those years ago. And each time she woke up, there was the same feeling, like something unfinished was waiting. Meanwhile, Meera's journey had already begun. Sitting alone during her travel, she kept replaying everything in her mind. The argument. The silence that followed. The years that slipped by without real conversation. And most of all, that one sentence she wished she could take back. She had told herself for so long that it didn't matter. That words spoken in anger disappear with time. But now she wasn't so sure. Because if they truly disappeared, why did they still feel so present? When she finally reached Anya's home, she paused at the door. For a brief moment, her confidence faded. She wasn't the strong, unshaken woman people believed her to be. In that moment, she was just a mother, unsure if she would be welcomed or pushed away. The door opened. Aanya stood there. For a second, neither of them moved. No words, no smiles. Just two people standing face to face, carrying years of unspoken emotions. Then quietly, Aanya stepped aside. Meera walked in. The air between them was tense, but not hostile. It was something more complicated. Something fragile. Rohan greeted Meera politely, trying to ease the moment, but even he could feel the weight in the room. This wasn't just a family visit. This was something else entirely. The first few hours passed in small talk. Simple questions. Safe topics. But underneath it all, there was a quiet pressure building. Like a storm waiting for the right moment. It came sooner than expected. That evening, as the three of them sat together, a simple conversation slowly turned deeper. It started with casual questions about health, about life, about time passing. And then, it shifted. Meera hesitated before asking, "Is everything okay?" The question was simple. But it wasn't. Aanya looked down for a moment. She could feel her heart beating faster. This was it. The moment she had imagined again and again, but now that it was here, it didn't feel any easier. Rohan stayed silent, giving her space. Aanya took a breath. "No," she said quietly. The word changed everything. The room felt still. She didn't go into details right away. But she didn't hide it either. She spoke slowly, carefully about the struggles, the waiting, the confusion. About how nothing had clear answers. Meera listened without interrupting. At first, her face showed concern. But as Aanya continued, something else appeared, something deeper. Guilt. Because even though Aanya didn't mention it directly, both of them knew what was sitting between those words. The past. The silence stretched. And then, almost without planning it, Aanya said it. "That day what you said." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. "I tried to forget it. I really did. But it never fully went away." Meera's expression changed instantly. The words hit her harder than anything else that had been said. "I didn't mean it," she replied quickly, almost instinctively. "I was angry. I didn't." "I know," Aanya interrupted softly. "I know you didn't mean it. But that doesn't mean it didn't stay." The honesty in her voice made it impossible to look away from the truth. For the first time, they weren't avoiding it. They were facing it. And it was heavier than either of them expected. Rohan shifted slightly, sensing the intensity building, but he stayed quiet. This was something only they could work through. Meera looked down at her hands. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Because every excuse, every explanation, felt small compared to what had been carried for so long. "I was scared," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how to handle losing you." Aanya felt something tighten in her chest. Those words sounded familiar, almost like something she had heard before. In her dreams. The realization sent a chill through her. because now it didn't feel like just a memory anymore. It felt connected. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if something unseen was listening again, waiting. And just as the conversation reached its most intense point, something unexpected happened. Aanya suddenly felt dizzy. The room spun slightly and she reached out to steady herself. Rohan stood up immediately, concern on his face. "Aanya." Meera froze, her eyes wide with fear. Because in that moment, everything felt like it was about to change. But no one yet knew how. Rohan caught her just in time before she could fall. "Aanya, sit down," he said, his voice firm but filled with concern. Meera stood frozen for a second, then quickly moved closer, her hands trembling slightly as if she wanted to help but didn't know how. "I'm fine. It's just dizziness," Aanya said, though her voice didn't sound convincing even to herself. Her heart was racing, and there was a strange ringing in her ears, like everything around her had suddenly become distant. But something about this didn't feel normal. Rohan insisted they get her checked. Within minutes, they were on their way, the earlier conversation left hanging in the air like an unfinished sentence. The car ride was tense. Meera sat in the back, silently watching Aanya. Her mind was racing with fear, guilt, and something else she couldn't explain. That moment, seeing her daughter almost collapse right in front of her, had shaken her deeply. At the clinic, everything moved quickly. Basic checks, questions, routine tests. Aanya sat quietly, answering when needed, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She kept replaying the conversation. The words, the way everything seemed to build up to that exact moment. It felt too sudden to be random. Rohan tried to stay calm, but his worry was clear. He stayed close to Aanya, not leaving her side even for a second. After what felt like hours, the doctor finally returned with a calm expression. "There's no immediate danger," he said, which made all three of them breathe a little easier. "But there's something you should know." The pause that followed felt heavier than the words themselves. Aanya looked up, her hands tightening slightly. The doctor continued, "We'll need to run a few more tests to be certain, but there are early signs that suggest a possible pregnancy." For a moment, no one reacted. The words didn't fully register. Rohan blinked, trying to process it. Meera's eyes widened in shock. And Aanya? She just stared as if the world had suddenly stopped making sense. "A pregnancy?" Rohan repeated, his voice uncertain. The doctor nodded. "It's very early. We need confirmation. But the signs are there." Silence filled the room again. This was the one thing they had been hoping for, waiting for, praying for. But instead of joy, there was confusion. Because the timing didn't feel real. Anya's mind went blank, then suddenly flooded with thoughts all at once. The years of waiting. The struggles. The questions. And now, this? Right here, right after everything that had just happened? It didn't feel simple. It didn't feel easy. It felt connected. On the way back home, no one spoke much. The atmosphere had completely shifted. This wasn't just about hope anymore. It was something far more complicated. Rohan wanted to be happy. He really did. But even he couldn't ignore how sudden it all felt. Just hours ago they were talking about fear, about the past, about something that had been weighing on Aanya for years. And now, out of nowhere, this. Meera, sitting quietly, felt her chest tighten. A part of her wanted to see this as a blessing, a second chance. But another part, a darker, more uneasy part, couldn't stop thinking about the timing. Because it felt like an answer. But to what? When they reached home, Aanya walked straight to her room. She needed space. Needed silence. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap, her thoughts spinning faster than she could control. Pregnancy. The word echoed in her mind. It was everything she had wanted. Everything she had waited for. So why didn't it feel right? Why did it feel like something else was hiding beneath it? Her eyes slowly moved toward the mirror. For a moment, she just stared at her reflection. But then, something felt off. Not visibly. Not clearly. But something didn't feel the same. Her expression changed slightly as if she was trying to recognize something, or someone. Then suddenly, the memory of her dream flashed in her mind. Her mother, younger, silent, looking lost. Anya's breath caught. Because the feeling she had right now, it was the same. Confused, uncertain. Almost like she was standing in between something she couldn't see. A knock on the door broke her thoughts. It was Meera. For a moment, Aanya didn't respond. But then slowly she said, "Come in." Meera stepped inside, hesitating near the door before moving closer. She looked at Aanya carefully as if trying to understand what was going on in her mind. "I don't know what to feel," Aanya admitted quietly before Meera could say anything. Meera swallowed. It's good news, she said softly, though even her voice carried uncertainty. Is it? Aanya asked, looking up at her. The question wasn't challenging. It was genuine. And that made it harder to answer. Because deep down both of them felt it. This wasn't just good news. This was something more. Something they didn't fully understand yet. And then Aanya said something that made the air feel even heavier. What if this isn't just happening now? She whispered. What if it's been building up all this time? Meera's heart skipped a beat. Because suddenly the idea didn't feel impossible. The past. The words. The fear. The silence. What if none of it had really ended? What if it had just been waiting for this moment? Outside the room, Rohan stood quietly, having heard just enough to know that this wasn't over. Not even close. Because now the question wasn't just about a curse. It was about something deeper. Something that connected past and present in a way none of them could ignore anymore. And whatever it was, it had only just begun to reveal itself. That night, no one slept properly. Aanya lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind moving between hope and fear. Every time she tried to feel happy about the news, something pulled her back. Not doubt exactly, but a feeling that this moment was tied to something unfinished. In the next room, Meera sat quietly, her hands clasped together. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to fully face what she had done. Not just the words she had spoken, but the fear behind them, the control she had tried to hold onto, and the distance it had created. And Rohan, he watched both of them, feeling like he was standing in the middle of something much deeper than he had ever imagined. This was no longer just about a child or a medical journey. This was about healing something that had been broken long ago. The next morning, the air felt heavy but clearer. Like something was waiting to be said. Aanya walked into the living room and found Meera already there. For a moment they just looked at each other. No anger this time. No sharp edges. Just honesty and exhaustion from carrying too much for too long. I need to ask you something, Aanya said softly. Meera nodded, her throat tightening. That day when you said those words, what were you really feeling? The question wasn't about blame. It was about truth. Meera took a deep breath. For a moment she struggled to find the right words. But then slowly she let go of the need to sound strong. I was scared, she admitted. Not of you, but of losing you. I had spent my whole life holding everything together. And when you started building your own life, I didn't know where I fit anymore. Her voice shook slightly. I thought if I lost control, I would lose you completely. Aanya listened quietly, her eyes softening. And those words? She asked gently. Meera closed her eyes for a second. They came from fear, not from my heart. I never wished anything bad for you. Not then, not ever. Silence followed, but this time it felt different. It wasn't heavy. It was releasing something. Aanya felt her chest tighten, then slowly loosen. For years she had carried those words as something powerful, something final. But now, hearing the truth behind them, they didn't feel the same. They stayed with me, Aanya said, her voice barely above a whisper. Even when I tried to forget, they kept coming back. Meera stepped closer, her eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry, she said, and this time there was no hesitation, no pride, no defense. Just truth. And something shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but deeply. It was like a weight both of them had been carrying finally found a place to rest. Aanya took a slow breath, her eyes filling with tears she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. I think I held on to them, she admitted. Maybe more than I should have. Rohan, standing nearby, watched quietly. He could see it happening. The change, the release, the healing that couldn't be forced but had finally found its way. That same day they returned to the clinic for confirmation. This time the weight felt different. Less fearful. More real. When the doctor finally spoke, there was no uncertainty left. It's confirmed, he said with a small smile. You're pregnant. For a second everything went still. Then, slowly the meaning settled in. Aanya looked at Rohan, her eyes searching his, and this time, she smiled. Not out of pressure, not out of hope, but out of something real. Relief, joy, and something else, peace. Rohan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding and gently held her hand. Meera stood beside them, her eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time but of something softer. It felt like everything had come full circle. The words that once felt like a curse no longer had the same power. The fear that once controlled everything had finally been faced. And for the first time in a long while, things made sense. Or at least they felt right. Days passed, and the home slowly filled with a different kind of energy. Lighter. Warmer. Conversations became easier. Laughter returned in small moments. But just when it seemed like everything had settled, something unexpected happened. One evening, Aanya was going through some old things her mother had brought along. Among them was an old notebook, something Meera had kept for years. "Just old memories," Meera said casually. But as Aanya flipped through it, something caught her attention. A page. Worn, slightly faded. And written on it, a sentence. Her breath caught. It wasn't exactly the same as what Meera had said that day, but it was close. Too close. She looked up slowly. "What is this?" Meera frowned, trying to remember. Then her expression changed. "That. I wrote that years ago," she said quietly. "During a difficult time. I was angry, hurt, and I wrote things I didn't mean." Anya's heart started racing again. "Before I even grew up?" she asked. Meera nodded slowly. The room felt still. Because suddenly, everything shifted again. This wasn't just about one moment. One argument. One sentence. It had existed before. In a different form. At a different time. And somehow, it had found its way forward. Aanya looked down at the page again, her mind spinning. The past hadn't just stayed in the past. It had echoed. Changed shape. Returned. And now, standing at the edge of a new beginning, she couldn't help but wonder. Had they truly broken the cycle? Or had they just stepped into the next part of it, without even realizing? For a long moment, no one said anything. Aanya kept staring at the page, her fingers lightly tracing the faded ink. It didn't feel like just a sentence anymore. It felt like a thread, something that had quietly stretched across years, connecting moments that once seemed separate. Meera slowly sat down, her face pale. "I didn't even remember that," she whispered. "It was just something I wrote when I was angry with life, not with you." "But it sounds so similar," Aanya replied softly. "Like the same feeling, the same fear." Rohan stepped closer, looking at both of them. "Maybe that's what it is," he said carefully. "Not a curse, not something supernatural. Just something that kept repeating because it was never understood." His words didn't dismiss what they were feeling. Instead they grounded it. Aanya looked up, her eyes thoughtful now instead of afraid. "So all this time, I wasn't being affected by what you said that day," she said to Meera. "I was holding on to a fear that existed long before that." Meera nodded slowly, tears forming again. "And I passed that fear to you, without even realizing." There was no denial left. No hiding. Just truth. And strangely, that truth didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt freeing. Aanya closed the notebook gently and placed it aside. She took a deep breath, as if letting go of something that had been sitting inside her for years. "I don't want to carry this anymore," she said, her voice steady. Meera looked at her, unsure. "What do you mean?" "I mean the fear, the guilt, the idea that words can control our lives like this," Aanya explained. "I think we gave it too much power." Rohan smiled faintly. "And now you're taking that power back." Aanya nodded. For the first time, everything felt clear. The curse was never really a curse. It was fear. Fear that had been left unspoken, passed down, and held onto for too long. And now, it was finally being understood. Over the next few days, something began to change in a real, visible way. Not just in their conversations, but in their energy, their presence with each other. Meera stayed with them longer than planned. But this time it didn't feel uncomfortable or forced. She helped around the house, shared stories from her past, stories she had never opened up about before. Aanya listened, sometimes surprised, sometimes emotional. She began to see her mother not just as someone who had hurt her, but as someone who had been carrying her own struggles quietly for years. And Meera, in turn, started seeing Aanya not as someone she might lose, but as someone strong enough to live her own life without leaving her behind. Rohan, watching this shift, felt a sense of relief. The tension that once filled the space between them had softened into something warmer, something real. One evening, as they sat together, Meera gently placed her hand over Anya's. "You're going to be a wonderful mother," she said softly. This time those words didn't carry fear. They carried trust. Aanya smiled, her eyes calm. "I'll try to do things differently," she replied. "Not perfectly, but differently." Meera nodded. "That's enough." The days turned into weeks, and Anya's pregnancy progressed smoothly. Each visit to the doctor brought reassurance instead of anxiety. Each small moment, hearing a heartbeat, feeling the first signs of change, felt real in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. The dreams stopped. Or maybe they didn't need to continue anymore. Because whatever they were trying to show her, she had finally understood. One afternoon, Aanya picked up the old notebook again. She looked at the page one last time, then carefully tore it out. Meera noticed but didn't stop her. Anya folded the page and placed it in a small box, not as something to fear, but as something to remember. Not the words themselves, but the lesson behind them. That unspoken emotions don't disappear. They wait. And they repeat, until someone chooses to understand them. Later that evening, as the sun set softly outside, Anya stood by the window, her hand resting lightly on her stomach. Rohan came up beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, a small smile forming. "Yeah. I think I finally am." There was no tension in her voice now. No confusion. Just quiet certainty. Meera watched them from a distance, her heart full in a way she hadn't felt in years. She realized something then, something simple but powerful. Love wasn't about control. It was about letting go of fear. And sometimes the hardest part wasn't forgiving others. It was forgiving yourself. As time moved forward, their story didn't become perfect. There were still small disagreements, moments of worry, and days that felt uncertain. But the difference was clear. They no longer carried the past like a burden. They carried it like a lesson. And that made all the difference. Because in the end, what seemed like a curse that backfired in the most shocking way, turned out to be something else entirely. Not a curse, but a cycle. One that could have continued quietly, shaping lives without anyone noticing. Until someone chose to stop it. And that choice changed everything.